the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, where the goal is to empower and educate you to legally and ethically minimize taxes paid over your lifetime.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Teaching Tax Flow, the podcast, episode 79. We got a good one for you today. I am actually going to be technically interviewing, Chris Picciurro. So I know you've heard his voice, obviously my co-host here on the podcast, but I get to, as always, play the dumbest guy in the room and ask questions of the smart guy. So before we get into it, as always, let's take a very brief moment and thank our episode sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Strategic Associates. Are you a high-income earner, real estate investor, or successful entrepreneur who is frustrated by having to pay $75,000 or more of annual tax liability? If so, Strategic Associates can help. Your first step to saving thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, is to contact Roger Roundy at roger@strategicag.net or by calling 801-641-2956 and be sure to tell him TTF sent you.
All right, everybody, I've been looking forward to this one here for, we're on episode 79, probably 77 episodes, where I get to grill this guy on what actually goes on in his brain. Besides pickleball, we'll try. Here's a challenge. Chris, let's not talk about pickleball. Well, you know what? Screw that. We're going to talk about pickleball. That's what goes on in your brain. It's part of your daily life. But, good sir, are you ready for this sit-down interview on the day in the life of a tax pro?
I am, and I'm not going to mention pickleball. I was not going to, but of course you did, which is fine. But as much as I love pickleball, I still have only been playing for about 2 years, maybe a hair less, and I've been a CPA for well over 20. So the day in the life of a tax pro, I live it every day, if I like it or not.
Especially around this time, right? I mean, literally Actually, Chris, what is the tax deadline this year? I know, obviously today being April 16th, is it still the 15th every year, or does it kind of fluctuate a little bit?
Well, as you know, John, the tax deadline is a fictitious date, in my opinion, because you could always file a tax extension and get 6 extra months. Sometimes it is April 15th is the quote-unquote what people call tax day, although I do not like that term. It is, so it was yesterday.
I'm gonna say this. If anybody, before we get too deep into that one, I challenge anybody else that runs into Chris at an event to come up to him and say, "Don't you just love tax season?" And I bet you this guy carries around a taser with him. That every time you hear tax season, I know your face turns extremely red. Steam starts coming out of the ears. You'll probably just drop somebody to the ground every time you hear that, right?
Well, if I have my pickleball paddle, I'll take it out of the bag and hit him over the head with it.
There. Hey, you said pickleball, even though I'm the one that said it first. There it was. So let's get into this a little bit, right?
So April 15th is, April 15th, sometimes it falls on a weekend or we have Emancipation Day and that deadline is bumped. But John, I think you just had a plan for me to mention that that's your birthday.
It was a big, what's funny though, too, if, I'm kind of curious on why the IRS ended up picking that day. I mean, obviously, it's a very special day for me and everybody in my life. But it's also some very unfortunate days, if I remember. It's the day the Titanic hit the iceberg. It's, I want to say it's Adolf Hitler's birthday. It's the day Lincoln got shot. So it's not really a good day. Besides,
day.
Obviously, this.
Infamous day. Well, it really comes down to the federal budget and how their fiscal year works. And it's interesting because we did an episode on quarterly estimated tax payments from a federal side, and the first quarter is due April 15th, yet the second quarter is June 15th, the third September 15th, and then the fourth is January 15th. So it's just an odd thing. But yeah, what is commonly referred to as tax day or the tax filing deadline or the deadline to file an original tax return or an extension is April 15th. That was yesterday. John, happy belated birthday. And also happy birthday to my youngest child, Luke, who's 11 today.
That's right. And so let's take a step back in Chris Picciurro history, I guess. So obviously we want to extrapolate as much information as possible from you on what your daily life looks like, right, as a tax pro. But maybe even go back a little bit and tell us how in the world you even got into this industry, right? Because it's normally not when you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, you know what? When I grow up, I'm gonna, be a tax guy." Usually doesn't happen, right?
Yes, it's funny. I was a guest on another podcast, a long form interview. It was like an hour and 10-minute interview, and I said that it's rare that you have a young boy in the front of his yard throwing his baseball back and forth to his dad, or a daughter, maybe doing something with one of her parents in the kitchen, making cookies or throwing a softball, kicking the soccer ball. It's like, one day I want to be a tax professional. It's very rare, but many of us in this industry fall into it for one reason or another. For me, I've always been very, very entrepreneurial, even when I was in my early teens. And I was a Detroit News paperboy back in the day when you used to drive your little bike around, have to collect the money. And there's tons of lessons that I learned from being a paperboy on running a business. And then I had a knack for numbers. And then I was lucky in high school. We had accounting as an elective in junior year. And then I did pretty well in that class. And a friend of mine's dad taught AP accounting, which we would go into school early, which it was cool because he opened up the afternoon a little bit. And I took advanced placement accounting as a senior in high school. And at that point, I really, really liked it. And I wasn't great at every math. But algebra clicked for me. And really, accounting is algebra. And so I thought, okay, well, if I become a CPA, then no matter what I do in business, it can't hurt me. And so it allows me to really still be an entrepreneur. I'm more of an entrepreneur that got into running an accounting or CPA practice than a traditional. Many CPAs are enrolled agents or tax professionals. They start working somewhere, and their main skill is that they're a tax professional, and then it evolves where they start their own practice. So I do a lot of consulting with other tax professionals on really how to run their practices more efficiently, how to have better client experiences. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, so I have a good pulse of, when I started, what I'm doing now. And when you proposed this very interesting topic, I thought, okay, well, how can I explain what we do? What we do on a daily basis as tax pros. And obviously it's much different in each from large firms to maybe smaller firms to even tax professionals that work within an organization. So like a General Motors or a Ford Motor Company or Amazon have tons of tax professionals, even internally, that work on tax compliance. So I figured I broke this down into 3 components that our tax professionals operate in. And each of us works in one or more of these a little more. Some tax professionals, many, really wear all of these hats. So I broke it down into, you've got tax compliance work, tax compliance activities, and under compliance, people might say, well, what the heck does that mean? In my mind, that means the stuff you're required to do. So that could be preparing tax returns. For some, it could be performing bookkeeping services. For some, it could be processing payroll. So these are things that have to be done. They have hard deadlines. And then the second bucket is our advisory services. So advisory services are more proactive planning and strategy. So advisory services, that's what I spend about 95% of my time on professionally. And I help not only people in our private CPA practice, but other people in the teaching tax law community on a one-on-one basis, and work and collaborate with other tax professionals to help people with planning and strategy, which is under advisory. So an example, a common advisory might be a tax pro talks to a taxpayer about what type of entity they should be if they form a business, or should they, if they're thinking about just selling a property, should they, what options they have to mitigate their taxes, what type of software they should use, they should be utilize QuickBooks, what type of people they need to help them implement strategy. So for me, the advisory piece that's what I do. After spending most of my career in compliance. And then the third part's practice management. So if you're a large firm, you might not spend tons of time in practice management, but under practice management, I look at that would include any type of operations, that would include marketing, bringing on new clients. That would mean HR. It would mean continuing education, running the actual business. And unfortunately, many tax professionals don't spend enough time in their practice management, in the practice management portion of what they're doing. And if you don't spend time, we talk about that if you don't plan for your tax, the IRS picks it. Well, if you don't manage your practice is going to manage you. And unfortunately, for me, another story for another episode, it managed my life for a long, long time. So I empathize, and I would say those three buckets: compliance, advisory, practice management. Now I'm really tilted into advisory with I do a little bit of practice management and not very much tax compliance at all. But I would say the majority of tax pros probably are pretty heavy into tax compliance work.
So you do a lot of, or a little bit of practice management, but a lot of pickleball. There you go. I dropped it in there again. And really,
not enough pickleball. Can never be enough.
Right. I knew you were going to say something about that. So it is interesting now, coming from my side of the fence, right? So obviously knowing you for well over 3/4 of my lifetime, I know I mentioned this in multiple podcasts before, our relationship dates back to you, as my grandmother used to say, doing the books for them. And then obviously my parents and myself, and now obviously we do a lot together, including have a lot of good times. But I think the most interesting thing, again, from the outside looking in, right, is just how much really your role has pivoted. And not even just that, really y'all's private CPA practice, right? So you guys have pivoted drastically. I'd say probably over the past five years maybe or so is when y'all made the biggest shifts?
Yeah, there's some major shifts made. The shifts started about 10 years ago and really fully got implemented in the last 5 to 6 years. And that's, like I said, when you're first starting off, and when you're maybe, when I first started off, we were a team of 2. And so we had to wear all the hats. And so I was heavy compliance. So we had, we were performing the bookkeeping services. We were doing what we call after the fact payroll. And again, this was 22 years ago, so we didn't have the technology that we have now. Now, we're a virtual on the private side. We're a virtual practice. So all of our apps, everything, our entire technology stack is in the cloud, in a secure environment. And that's how we operate. And, I went through some evolutions and some scares when we used to have like a server in our office, or we used to have a computer crash or something like that. So in our private CPA practice, yes, we've really evolved into narrowing our focus into primarily real estate investors. We have a sub niche in helping estate planning attorneys and some entrepreneurs. Yet, not all practices are not all practices are niched by industry. There could be a practice that's in a smaller town that's maybe niched towards just business owners within a 10-mile radius, because maybe there's some very interesting local taxes or local considerations or an industry that dominates that local market. Or it could be where a large corporation has there's a vast majority of people in that small town work for that one corporation. So you want a tax professional that is really familiar with maybe the 401k plan with that for that employer, and they're in that sort of stuff. So really, yeah, you're juggling that compliance, advisory, and practice management. I'd say the most challenging in many ways is practice management, because people, like think about when you go to the dentist or the doctor. I'm kind of wacky, as we know. I'm always looking at their processes, right? Because their process is their product. That's the way we look at things. And but when you go to your dentist and doctor, are you really focused on the software they're using, their scheduling app, you just know that you might like, hey, this is nice. They text me a reminder and it goes right into my calendar. But those are all the practice management things that a medical practice or dental practice has to consider. They also have HIPAA requirements. So we have our own requirements as a CPA or an enrolled agent or anyone that prepares taxes professionally under Circular 230 of the IRS. that we have our own ethical standards. We have our own ways we have to protect client data. So we have a lot of regulatory things that we have to think about. I mean, quite frankly, and you're aware of some of the stuff too. We have some regulatory bodies that we work with. I'm not going to mention the ones here, but we have to submit every transcript of this podcast before it gets released. And we've got so there's a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes that people don't see, and it's not easy to master those, and it's not really easy to become efficient at those. So you do a lot of failing forward. So yeah, I think, back to processes, I'd say as a tax pro or any business owner, I'm trying to, I would say my attitude now is I fail forward a lot, and we try to keep a positive attitude that it's only a problem until there's a process. So if for some reason there's a glitch in our software, if there's some reason we get 3 emails from our clients that didn't understand a piece of communication we sent out. If we get multiple people saying, I didn't really understand this, maybe it wasn't worded properly. So maybe it's something we did that didn't clearly communicate what we're trying to get across. And I think those things go through with any business, right? Most businesses have that, the thing you're doing, and then the operations and and then also healthily juggling, servicing current clients, determining if we should bring on any new clients, making sure those clients are a good fit, making sure that if a client isn't a great fit anymore, that there's an amicable split. There's a lot of different things that go into it, not just, I think the hourly facing thing is, I would imagine people think that we probably spend 95% of our time doing tax compliance. I mean, when April 15th hits, we're sitting around twiddling our thumbs, and that's far from the truth. And this, Jack, because you've been with me, and the summertime is a time where a lot of these big tax and accounting conferences take place, and we're lucky to be part of those conferences and present our role and many times. So, John, you've met accountants from all over the country. So I'm interested. So yeah, you probably see, just by talking to them, like, man, that person's like really technically savvy. They know the tax code well, but gosh, can you imagine trying to have them log into a Zoom meeting?
I think I built up the suspense in your mind about this show that I was going to grill you on all kinds of little nitty-gritty stuff and expose the world. So I promise I'll be nice. And you know what I'll do, even just to make it worse, kind of keep the carrot in front of you, is I'll just trickle them out over the next 10 episodes. Maybe I'll take my questions and, just to keep you on the edge of your seat. But I will let you off the hook, sir. So you can go take a nap if you want to, but it is tax season. And the only reason I say that is because we're virtual and, I'm not within taser reach. So
you're not in taser reach. And I would say, just to point out, we do know that I'm very involved. We don't know that but I am very involved with the state of Tennessee CPA Society and Michigan Association of CPAs. In both of them identify that the main challenge, at least in our industry as a CPA, as CPAs, is that we have a talent gap of new people entering our profession. So we have to make this profession more attractive. And I think I have hope. Over the last couple of years, I've met a lot of people that generation younger than myself, or maybe 10 years younger than me, that I really have a lot of hope in. So yeah, I mean, it's a great profession. If you know someone that's interested in learning about it, and please reach out to us. No matter where you live, I'm sure we can help guide you in the right direction, and just kind of have a little chat about that.
Awesome. Well, sir, you are off the hook. And in closing, I'll say one of the most impressive things that I've seen, really, Chris, obviously you in your practice, but a lot of people, they kind of poke fun of the industry and say, accountants and CPAs, they're very good at looking at the rearview mirror and not looking forward, where I think now I'm seeing, obviously you guys again, but I'm seeing more and more of them at these conferences. Either they're younger, they've started this way, or they're older and they're transitioning into this, is they're finally starting to look in that windshield a little bit more by way of tax planning and strategies. So it is great to see that firsthand. Now, I haven't seen a pocket protector at a conference yet, but I'm sure they're out there. So let's leave it at that. We will save the rest of the questions for another day, another time. And as I like to always close it, we will see everybody back here next week, same time, different topic, here on the Teaching Tax Flow Cast. Hey, everybody, thank you for hanging out with us again here on the podcast. I was not kidding when I said I was building up the suspense, trying to make Chris a little nervous that I was going to ask him some very difficult questions to ask. But as anybody that's ever had a conversation with this guy, you know it is incredibly difficult to stump him. And in pickleball. Actually, let's put it that way too. Let's be honest. He kicks my butt every time I even try to attempt the game, so I leave it at that. But next week, we've got a great topic, something that we have actually been asked a lot about. We are going to jump into discussing some modern payroll with a fantastic guest as always. So no more suspense for it. We'll see you back here very soon.
The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.